swiftly then onto someone else who is super high achieving, Judy Murray, who's enjoyed an extraordinary variety of success as a tennis professional. So we've got a theme emerging already. The Fed Cup captain, and of course, we can't not mention your remarkable run on Strictly Come Dancing. Today, Judy is here as an ambassador of Peugeot and has kindly agreed to share some of her insights with us. So please welcome to the stage. Would you be able to share some of your experiences of growing up in that hugely competitive world, and indeed how that gender balance has perhaps changed over the years?
Yeah, I could. I just wanted to say to Laura that was amazing. I love listening to strong women speaking, and she smiled the whole way through it. And I would also like to say that I had a Volkswagen Scirocco. That was like my favourite. And we obviously have tennis in common, and I don't show my arms either. And I'll tell you why. It was that Wimbledon 2005, which was Andy's first Wimbledon. He was in on a wild card as a scrawny, spotty, very hairy 18-year-old. And he won a few rounds, and we rented this little basement flat in Wimbledon Village, and we got back there at night, and we watched the highlights, because we'd watched the highlights of Wimbledon all of their young lives, and suddenly, my son's in the highlights of Wimbledon, and I'm watching it, and suddenly I see myself in the player box doing this. And I've got a vest top on, and they've got me in slow motion, thank you BBC. And it doesn't matter how slim you are, in slow motion everything wobbles. So when he comes out for his next match, I'm giving it the sea lion, but not for very long. The tennis world has changed enormously from when I was a young player, and I think in terms of gender equality, tennis is right up there. Is probably the best sport for being the most equal in lots of ways, not just with the prize money in the major events, but in the endorsement opportunities and the visibility in the media and on television in particular. And I think that on the women's side of the game, 3 of the biggest superstars of world sport in the last probably 10, 15 years have been women, and they are the Williams sisters, Serena and Venus, and Maria Sharapova. And even if you don't play tennis, you would know who they were, and that's a massive, massive asset to our sport. But I think that further down the sport, when you go back more into the grassroots and the administration, perhaps the organisation, the development of the game is where it's not equal. And that's more where I've started using my gob a lot. When I was coming here today, actually, Andy said to me, "Mum, what is it you're doing today?" And I told him, and he said, he rolled the eyes as usual and said, "Well, just don't try and be funny." And I went, "Well, I'll try." But anyway, so, I mean, there's so many examples that I could give you, but I think that when I became the Fed Cup captain at the back end of 2011, this was me, kind of went from doing 10 years as the Scottish national coach and growing players out of a country that had no track record of success in tennis and pretty shit weather. Well, actually, not even pretty shit, very shit weather. and no facilities and no world-class coaches or anything. And I gave up that job in early 2005 to concentrate on Jamie and Andy, on what they were doing. I found it very difficult to get anybody to take me seriously as a tennis coach, and I think it was mostly because I was female, and also because I came from a country that didn't really do tennis. So it was always run along, don't be silly, doors closed, etc., etc. And I thought, I think my kids could be quite good, and I wanted to give them the opportunity. So gave up the job as the Scottish national coach. So for a number of years, I largely became Andy and Jamie's mum, or rather Andy and Jamie's pushy mum. She who sharpens her elbows when she goes out to watch them playing, and she who... But this was really what the media painted me after that first Wimbledon. Thanks very much, media. They gave me a really rough time for many, many years, and I'm actually not like that at all, honestly. I'm not. But yeah, I think what I discovered when I became the Fed Cup captain, it was a big thing for me because it was somebody recognising that I was a good coach. And so I'd had these sort of 7 or so years of just being Andy and Jamie's mum. That was how I was seen. And it gave me a lot of confidence getting that role. But as soon as I stepped into that role, it didn't take me very long to realise how much harder you have to work to make anything happen on the women's side of the game compared to the men's side of the game. And the men's side of the game would be the 7 or 8 years that I'd experienced with the boys. And in all the years that I was learning to coach, because there was nobody to learn from in Scotland, I travelled to some workshops and conferences overseas to learn from people in other countries who obviously had vastly more experience than I did. I wanted to know what was going on in the international world of tennis. And not once in all those years of going to workshops and conferences did I ever have a female coach giving a presentation or an on-court session. Never. Occasionally there'd be a sports scientist, usually a nutritionist, but there was never a coach. And it's a bit like something that Laura said. I wanted to see somebody doing that job, somebody who did it day to day and produced players, because I wanted to know what that looked like. I wanted to know how to be. So huge believer in the visibility thing. You know, if you can see it, there is a chance that you can be it. If you never see it, why would you ever think that you could one day be like, I never wanted to stand up in front of anybody, I have to say. And now I do it quite easily because I've done a lot of it. But the way that came about, I would be very much back end of the room. Don't ask a question, don't answer a question, don't ask me to demonstrate anything if I was on any of these things. But what happened was that one year at the US Open, it was in the media that the ITF, which is the International Tennis Federation, had announced its latest board, 14 members, and they were all men. And it just incensed me. How do you cater for the women if there are no female voices on the board, if there are no decision makers? Because women think and act on behalf of women. Men think and act on behalf of men. That is perfectly logical. So I went to find the guy who was the director of development, who was somebody that I'd known for a number of years, not particularly well. And of course, I said, Dave, come here. And of course, I just ranted. And he stood and then he said, are you finished? And I went, yeah. And he said, okay, now let me just tell you, the Constitution is such that we can only select women if the member nations put forward women. No women were put forward. So it was worse than I thought. Not only is there no board, there were no nominees from all the member nations, which is all the countries around the world. Not one. He said, we can't pick them if there aren't any. And I went, well, why is that? And he said, because women are not stepping up and speaking up, and they're not putting themselves forward. And I went, well, why not? And then he said, well, look at you. He said, how many times have I asked you to speak at our worldwide conferences? And you go, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. You know, I couldn't stand in front of people, blah, 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 blah. And he turned the whole thing on me to the extent where I said, all right, then, I'll speak at your conference. And this was a long time ago. And I dreaded it and panicked. I made myself feel sick. I almost lost my voice. I was just terrified to do it. There was 1,000 people in Mexico. And I thought, if I fuck this up, tequila, I'm with you in the bar, and I'm right there. But it, you know, I look out the audience and I see 90% men, 10% women, and I'm thinking, girls, I'm taking this for the girls. And I made myself from that moment on, because if you survive it, you get confidence from surviving it. And I made myself do 3 or 4 a year to be the female coach that stood up for the women. And I still continue to try to do that at all levels of the game. I've gone back more into working in grassroots and building female workforces because we need numbers. And exactly like what Laura said, we have to stick together. If we stick together, we are much more powerful. I always kind of make the analogy of snowflakes. This is in sport anyway. I don't know if it's the same in your industry, but there are lots of us out there, lots of snowflakes, and we float around looking unique and gorgeous in our own ways, and then we hit something. We hit some kind of wall or barrier, and we fade away. But if all those snowflakes come together, you create a snowball, and snowballs can do a lot of damage.
So how would you rank that? So that sort of theme of self-belief and I think resilience, which I'm sure is going to be touched upon this afternoon, it seems to be a feature in high achievers. How do you identify that when it's not immediately obvious, particularly in women who don't amplify it perhaps in the same way that their male counterparts might?
Yeah, I think you have to believe in yourself and you have to put the blinkers on. This was certainly what I had to do when I discovered myself in the very male-dominated world of sport. And in tennis, of course, on the men's side of the game, you won't find very many coaches, female coaches, working on the men's side of the game, hardly any. But actually on the women's side of the game, you hardly find any female coaches either. It's very male-dominated the whole way through. And it can be a very lonely place to be when you're very much in the minority. And the last coaching qualification that I did, it was a year-long course. That doesn't mean it was 12 months. One after that, it was sort of 2 or 3 day workshops times 12 months of the year, probably about 14 workshops in total. And my kids were 7 and 8. And because there was nobody to learn from in Scotland, because there was no infrastructure, there was nothing really. And for me to invest in the kids that I was working with as the national coach, actually this is just before I was the national coach, it led to me becoming the national coach. I realised to invest in myself was to invest in the players. So I applied for a place on this course. I was a volunteer coach at our local club and I didn't really expect to get a place. But I was given a place because the head of coach education was a woman. And a bit like what you're saying, Laura, the 3 breaks that I got in my career that all came around the same time, or what went on to become my career, they were all given to me by women. And that has formed so much of how I am now in terms of creating more opportunities for women. But I started on this course in Basingstoke, and when I got there was 18 men on it and 2 women. There were 19 full-time coaches, and there was me as the volunteer part-time coach from Scotland, and of course I was the only Scot. So for me, very much out of my comfort zone, and I did just what you did when this guy said to me, "Welcome to the course, you're very lucky to have a place on it. You know, we had to turn a lot of guys away." And then he said to me, "We actually had a written complaint about you getting a place on the course." And he told me who the guy was that complained, and I knew him as a coach actually from my playing days. And he said, "What could you possibly offer to performance coaching when you have 2 kids?" And I looked at this guy and I thought, I'm right down at the bottom of England, I'm miles away from home, I'm feeling completely out of my depth, and the one thing I know about coaching or teaching more than anything else is your ability to make somebody feel good about themselves. And if they feel good about themselves, you can influence a change in behaviour or an improvement in performance, or certainly support for you if you make people feel good about themselves. This guy made me feel like this small. And so I went off and I didn't cry, but I sulked. I sulked for about an hour, and then I went into fuck you mode. And fuck you mode has served me very, very well. So that, you know, in terms of the blinkers and like, you know, I'm just gonna get on with it. And I passed that course not because I was a great coach. I passed it because I was clever. It was very information based and lots of projects that you had to do. But again, nobody stood in front of us and demonstrated the day-to-day life of running a program or working with a player, and nobody did it. And so again, I took the information and I had to work with it. And I worked really, really hard to try to provide opportunities for the kids that I was working with in Scotland. And as a result of passing the course, I got the chance to work with the Great Britain 12 and under and 14 under girls teams, which allowed me to travel, and I learned from coaches in other countries. Fantastic. And then the Scottish national coach job came up, and I was persuaded to apply for that by the woman who was the secretary of the association. And I said, "I've no experience." And she went, "No, but you've got passion. You've got passion and you worked hard and you want to learn." And I went for it. And I started with, we had no indoor courts when I started, none. In our shit weather, no infrastructure, had no staff. I had a £25,000 salary and a £90,000 budget. £90,000 for the whole of Scotland, from age 7 to the seniors, to pay for courts, coaches, if I could afford them, competitions, etc., etc. And I started with 20 kids aged between 7 and 11, and they were the best, the most promising ones that I thought that we had. And many years later, 4 of them played Davis Cup, 1 of them played Fed Cup. She became top 50 in the world and British #1 for many years. And Jamie and Andy obviously had all the successes that they had, and I had two other boys. One made 150 singles, and the other one made top 30 in doubles. And I also mentored, because I started a performance coach development program to produce more coaches, and I mentored a number. I brought people in from other countries because I didn't know enough. So these people helped me, but they also helped my group of young coaches. And of those young coaches, one heads up disability tennis in the UK now, and the other one is the Davis Cup captain and head of men's tennis. And they started with me when they were 20 and 22. And I didn't know enough, but I knew what I needed to create to help them. And so I'm just as it's just that there were so many things that you said that I was just thinking, oh, there's so many similarities, but at the end of the day, the being human and being yourself, and the mentoring and the giving of your time and the creating almost like a family unit. It was like a little cottage industry that we had in Scotland, and we could never have imagined where we were going. But I think whenever I talk about it, it's about investing in people. And it's about bringing people together, which is exactly what you were talking about as well. So I probably went off a bit off track there. I only need about one question, and I just go off on one. But I think that the whole way through for me in Scotland, I was never standing on anyone's toes, because I was creating everything. There was nothing to step on. It was when I stepped out of Scotland that I found, it was this sort of get back in your box, and it is. You really have to believe in what you're doing, which basically means you need to believe in yourself. And it's not always easy. And sometimes you have to put in a bit of a bluff that you do know what you're doing. But there is no substitute for hard work. And at the end of the day, it's also about remaining true to your roots and being humble and grounded and sharing.
And you've had, considering this phenomenal, success story, you've had a pretty rough ride in the press sometimes. I think we now know it's partly to do with the arms and maybe being in fuck you mode. But, why is that? Because it strikes me that is not an uncommon experience for women when they are very high achieving and driven. How do you deal with that? I mean, that must be pretty brutal sometimes.
Yeah, I think that was probably the hardest thing to deal with, because you suddenly find yourself in the spotlight. If you think about that Wimbledon in 2005, there's no ad breaks on the BBC. And so at the change of ends and the change of sets, of course, the commentators and the cameras need somewhere to go. So they go into the player boxes and they talk about who's in the player boxes. And that Wimbledon, we were all brand new. And I was an interesting, probably very unusual dynamic of a mother of two sons that were playing in the event. I think fathers of sons and fathers of daughters, and even mothers of daughters, is much more common, certainly in tennis. But you found yourself picked out in a way that you wouldn't have been picked out if your kids played any other sport. If my kids played football, nobody would know, because they never find you. But they do at Wimbledon, and the media, who are predominantly male, all the pictures that they used of me were always these ones where I was like, always. So of course people thought I was demented and aggressive, and I understand that. I'd have probably thought that if it wasn't me. I'd have gone, look at that, what's she like? But the thing is, you never know when the cameras are on you, but this was what they painted me to be right from the start. And I used to have to tell myself, the people who write all these nasty columns and opinion pieces and everything, they don't know you. You've never spoken to them. I never did interviews. And you just have to get the blinkers on. And I developed quite a thick skin over the years. But, it was really interesting that actually, when Andy won Wimbledon, they forgave me for everything. Suddenly I was okay, But it is that thing, I think, for women to get to the top of anything, we have to be excellent. We have to be excellent. For men to get to the top, you don't always have to be excellent. And I listened to Michelle Obama talking about this. I can't remember if it was last year, the year before. She was doing something in Edinburgh, and I just felt myself sitting nodding at everything that she was saying. But it was probably the biggest thing that she said for me was this whole thing about women needing to be excellent to get to the top. And I thought, you know, that's right. I never spoke out about the whole journey of everything that we went through as a family to help the boys to get to where, and we had no idea where we were going. It started off as a little hobby. Like, I loved tennis, and they did all sports when they were little. And then when they got good at tennis, it was like, okay, what do we do next? What does the next year going to look like in 2 years' time? And it was learning, you know, what's the next step? What's the next step? We had no idea where we were going. Maybe it wasn't going to land anywhere. I never would have imagined we'd all end up doing what we did. But it's one of those things that anything's possible if you put your mind to it and you believe in it and you work hard. The hard work is the thing that's the most important. But the without question, the worst thing for me was reading all these awful things. And the absolute worst time was when Andy lost the final of the Australian Open. I think it was 2012, and it was his fourth final loss in a Grand Slam. And we flew home on the Monday, and on the Tuesday morning, I went down to get some bread, and outside our local newsagent was this billboard thing saying, "Ditch your mum, Andy, or you'll never win a slam. Boris Becker." And so Boris Becker had written this article, opinion piece, which obviously he would be paid for. And when it's in the paper one day as an opinion piece, the next day it's in every paper. And I turned round and went home, and I didn't go out of my house for 3 days. It made me feel so bad. And I've never spoken to Boris Becker before that. He didn't know anything about us. I didn't even know Andy. And I thought, oh, you have no idea all the things that we've had to go through. And I hadn't coached him for a number of years. I'd always tried to find the best people and let them get on with it. But of course, on the business side, you need to do all that stuff because they're young. They can't do it all themselves. You need somebody that you can trust managing everything for you in the background. So Boris Becker, I thought everybody will think he's absolutely right, that this is all my fault and that I am a nightmare, because he's such a credible in the world of tennis. So actually, when he went bankrupt, I didn't smile at all.
Yeah, it's not working out so well for him, is it? So I've got one more question before. I think we'll have time for one or two if anyone would like to ask one. But I promise that I will introduce the Strictly experience. You know, that was really stepping outside of your comfort zone. What do you think are the benefits of doing that, if there are any?
Yeah, when I got asked if I would be interested in doing Strictly, I was like just hyper, because I've always loved Strictly, and I never would have imagined being given the opportunity to do it. And I thought, right, well, I need to speak to the boys about it, because our lives all impact on each other, as you can imagine. So I took the easy option, and I went to ask Jamie first. And he said, oh, Mum, you love Strictly, you should do that, you have a great time, you know, whatever. And I thought, yeah, okay. I went to see Andy. He went, oh my God, you'll be crap. And actually, they were both right, because I had a great time and I was crap. But actually, you don't really know what you're getting into until you get into it. And you really have to be prepared to park your life for about 3 or 4 months, because you don't know how long it's going to last. And I lasted quite a long time, because the public kept saving me. I was always bottom, second bottom, or third bottom. And every week Anton would say to me, don't worry, partner, they got it upside down again, the leaderboard. But really it was fascinating being part of it and seeing how they put that show together. You made great friends out of it. And the terrifying bit was on the Saturday night, when you actually have to do the dance. Everything else was like just great fun. And for me, we'd pretty much dedicated my whole life to tennis, or certainly my working life to tennis. It was just so nice to step into somebody else's world, and suddenly there was high heels and dresses and makeup and hair, and I was never interested in clothes before. I'm a little bit more interested now, but you know, you train all week, about 3.5 days you get to learn every new dance. In an empty dance studio, you, your partner, and a CD player. Is no props, no costume, nothing. And it's all very relaxed and fun. But I realized that I was in trouble about 4 days before we had to do our first dance, we had a waltz. It was to Mull of Kintyre. I hate Mull of Kintyre now. I had 2 weeks of Mull of Kintyre, and if I hear it on the radio, it's like off. And the set producer came into our little dance studio, and I would stop to have a drink, and Anton was talking to him about what he wanted in terms of costume and props and whatever. And he said, Mull of Kintyre, I want a bagpiper piping us in, a real bagpiper. And he said, I want the full kilt outfit, I want the dagger down my sock, I want the hairy handbag, sporran. I said, I want Judy in a white dress with a sash, tartan sash. He said, I want a grassy hillock with a seat cut out of it for her to sit in. I want heather all around it. And I'm thinking, oh, it sounds gorgeous. And then he said, and it's Mull of Kintyre, so it's mist rolling in from the sea. So can we have dry ice? And can we have it to neck height? You got to think about it. And that was when I knew that I was in trouble. But you have got to think about it. It's like you can't see me dancing if it's up here. But yeah, he always made everything like really good fun. He dressed everything in humour, so it never made me feel like I was awful at it. But when you step out of your comfort zone like that, and you survive it, it's the same thing as we were talking about before. You get a strength from it, and you get the encouragement, of course, and the confidence from it to carry on with it. But I think for me, I think it helped me a lot that many, many people who probably always had just seen me stressed out in the player box at the Grand Slams and looking like I never smiled and I had no personality and I was aggressive, competitive woman. Whereas a bit like when you asked me the question before about guys, if you're a man who's competitive or a father who's competitive, that's something that's laudable. If you're a woman that's competitive, it's almost like something like they made you feel bad about being competitive. And I am competitive, except when it came to Strictly, I wasn't competitive in the slightest. I think it was because I knew I was rubbish. I just didn't want to go home. Nobody wants to go home because you're having so much fun. But it definitely let people see more my character. And it did give me a whole lot of confidence, and it made a lot more people interested in what I do in terms of growing grassroots tennis. So it's actually helped my Tennessee career a lot because many more people were interested in what I try to do in terms of growing the game across the UK.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have we got any questions? Business, tennis, or dancing? Fantastic.
Nothing rude or difficult.
Thank you both. I think everyone would agree, amazing presentations and really great to hear both stories. You've both talked about mentors, which is probably no surprise, and you've talked about female mentors. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about any thoughts you've got about how women can help other women in the workplace on a day-to-day basis or on a mentoring basis. Do you think we make that explicit enough? Do you think we put enough effort into actively helping each other out? Or do you think there's more that we could do? I'd be curious to hear your experiences or any suggestions you've got.
Yeah, I think I can't speak for other industries, but I would say that within what I do, we probably about 85% of the tennis coaching workforce in the UK are guys. So about 2.5 years ago, I started a program with the LTA called She Rallies, which is all about building a bigger, stronger female workforce. And the way that I did it was, the first thing I did was a one-day conference, just female coaches and just female speakers. For obvious reasons. So a room full of women where you bring all the women together who have a common cause or a common passion, you will find the willingness to network and share. We didn't find egos among female coaches. We found willingness to ask questions, answer questions, help each other out. We started a closed Facebook page after that, which was amazing, because then even if you don't live anywhere, a lot of us in coaching, we work in isolation. So actually creating an opportunity to network through a closed social media page was a really great thing. We started an ambassador program and we took on 26 part-time ambassadors. I trained them up over a weekend and they go out in the field in their own patches and they build their own army of teachers, parents, club members, students, all female, so they grow their own people around them and they mentor them. So it was all different levels of empowering women to take on a little something. Because with many women, especially if we have children, we don't want anything full-time or too demanding, but we want to contribute. So I think a lot in the workplace is about understanding the world according to women and making more flexible options, whether that's, like we start all our courses at 10 and we finish them at 2, because a lot of women have to take their kids to school and pick them up again from school. So we understand that. So instead of doing 9 till 4, we do 10 till 2, and we do half courses, for example. So we just started to be a lot more adaptable and flexible. And because it is run by women for women, we understand our world, and we have more chance, I think, to get that right. That's not to say that men don't always, but I think we need more women in those kind of decision-making, leading. And I would certainly say in the world in which I live, in terms of the governing body of sport, the key decision makers are still all men. So the fact that we have our own thing is a huge, huge strength. And it's aimed at grassroots, but we need it now to move into the next stage, because what you need is career pathway and career opportunity. So I don't know if that entirely answers your question, but sometimes you have to create something where you can bring women together. So whether it's a one-on-one, or whether it's a small group, or whether it's a bigger group, or whether it's just through a closed Facebook page, that there's somewhere where you can get ideas and questions answered. But I think the whole mentoring thing, the quickest way and the simplest way to get good at something is to work alongside somebody who's been there and done it and is great at what they do. And if we can all share a little bit with somebody, we would make the world, the working world, a much better place for women.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We've got time for one last quick question, then we will be out of time.
It's quite a quick question. Thank you for such a frank and honest presentation. That was really great. So I like to ask this question sometimes, but if you could tell your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would be around the believing in yourself and not worrying about what other people think of you. And very much like what Laura said, strangely enough, I think women especially, we're so concerned by what other people think of us or how we look. A word in the wrong word at the wrong time, and we hold on to it and we let it affect us and we worry about it. And it's like, I think of all the things that I worried about back then, and all the things that I didn't do because I didn't believe that I could. And I think a lot of it was, in the sporting sense, was because I was a girl. And the girl side of my sport was so small compared to the boys. And the boys always seemed much more confident and much more noisy, much more robust and much more competitive. And there wasn't, and all the coaches were guys as well. And I never really felt like, nobody built my confidence up by making me feel good about myself. And I think I learned so much about what I have become as a coach from my own experiences. So I think believe in yourself and don't worry so much about what you think other people think of you, or don't say what you think people expect you to say. Be yourself and go for it. And now I think, since I certainly found it since I hit 50, if I want to go for it, I'm fucking well going for it. I got a tattoo. I mean, what's that? I would never have done that when I was 18.
Brilliant. I think we will end there. Thank you so much. I said, how do we follow that? There you go. Brilliant.